Suspended Osceola County Sheriff Marcos Lopez wants his trial moved to his home county. And we're also learning more about the first plea deal in the state's racketeering investigation into what's being called an
4:17 a.m., long before Florida's heat rose and the streets of Osceola County came alive, a convoy of unmarked SUVs rolled out of an FBI staging point. Their headlights were dimmed, radios muted, and movement synchronized with military precision. Agents had one target, a cluster of law enforcement officers whose uniforms once symbolized authority, but now concealed a criminal alliance tied to some of the most violent cartels operating in the Western Hemisphere. This was not a routine corruption probe, it was the moment federal investigators pierced a pipeline of power, cash, and violence that had quietly taken root inside the very institutions meant to defend the public. Still, the sheriff's sophistication carried a fatal flaw. He believed his inner circle was loyal. He believed the silence would hold. He believed no one would dare cross a man who controlled arrests, assignments, and futures. He was wrong. Because deep inside his own operation was the person who would ultimately bring it crashing down, a man whose betrayal would change everything and who was already talking to the FBI. Long before the FBI raid exposed the network, the machinery of Sheriff Lopez's corruption was already operating with the precision of a cartel-run franchise. The system revolved around a simple formula: cash and protection out. Those who paid Lopez were shielded, those who refused became targets, and those who threatened his revenue streams were quietly removed from the playing field. Federal investigators uncovered a pattern that repeated itself with unsettling consistency. Operators of illegal gambling rooms, many of them funneling proceeds into cartel-linked financial channels, delivered envelopes stuffed with cash to intermediaries. In return, Lopez granted what looked on paper like legitimate law enforcement oversight, but in practice functioned as sanctioned criminal protection. When rivals attempted to open gaming rooms without approval, Lopez deployed deputies to raid them under the guise of law enforcement. These raids were not about justice. They were about monopoly. But nothing illustrated the sheriff's power more grotesquely than his distribution of honorary badges. Intended as ceremonial tokens, these badges became currency granted to figures who had no business holding law enforcement credentials. Some badge recipients had ties to gambling operations, others acted as fixers, smoothing business deals, collecting debts, or intimidating competitors. By placing an official emblem in their hands, Lopez gave civilians the appearance of legal authority a privileged cartels have spent decades trying to purchase in other jurisdictions. Each badge functioned like a backstage pass into the sheriff's circle, providing cover influence and legitimacy. To outsiders, these men appeared to be community partners. To the FBI, they were part of a shadow network extending Lopez's reach beyond his department. The money flow was equally revealing. Investigators traced cash drops that occurred in parking lots, restaurants, and back offices of social clubs scattered across Central Florida. Tens of thousands of dollars moved monthly, what agents described as a well-oiled laundering system disguised as community entertainment venues. Lopez didn't just allow these operations to run, he structured them, protected them, and weaponized them when needed. And when a competitor refused to play by Lopez's rules, retaliation was swift. Deputies under his direction conducted targeted raids, seized machines, shut down venues, and publicly portrayed the actions as heroic crime fighting. In reality, the sheriff was eliminating threats to his cash pipeline. But the empire he built, fueled by cash badges and intimidation, carried a flaw he never anticipated. One of his closest allies was quietly turning against him. For years, Sheriff Lopez believed his inner circle was airtight. He handpicked allies, rewarded loyalty, and enforced silence through fear as much as through favor. But the collapse of every criminal empire begins the same way, not with an outsider breaking in, but with an insider breaking ranks. For Lopez, that insider was Krishna Maharaj, the trusted operator who managed money flows, mediated disputes, and served as the sheriff's informal bridge to the gambling underworld. Krishna was more than an associate. He was the architect of many backroom deals, the handler of cash drop-offs, and the keeper of operational secrets, including which rooms paid protection, which owed back taxes which competitors needed to be handled, and which deputies could be relied upon for selective enforcement. Lopez saw him as indispensable. What he didn't see was the pressure building around him. The operation detonated before sunrise. Deputies were pulled from their homes, badges stripped, service weapons seized as stunned neighbors watched. Arrest warrants named offenses that read like the script of a cartel thriller, racketeering illegal gambling networks, laundering operations and covert partnerships with criminal syndicates funneling drugs and undocumented migrants across US borders. The deeper agents dug, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't a handful of bad officers. This was a pattern, a model, a business structure built on betrayal from within. When federal agents first approached Krishna, they didn't come with threats. They came with evidence bank deposits. He couldn't explain messages he thought were deleted surveillance footage of meetings he believed were invisible. They laid out the structure of the criminal enterprise piece by piece, showing him exactly where he fit inside a conspiracy that now carried federal racketeering weight. For Krishna, the choice became brutally simple: go down with the empire or help dismantle it. He chose survival. Once he flipped, the FBI gained something far more valuable than financial records or wiretaps. They gained the blueprint. Krishna walked investigators through the entire ecosystem: how cash moved, how favoritism worked, which raids were staged to destroy competition, and which badge recipients acted as unofficial enforcers. He confirmed long-standing suspicions about Lopez's manipulation of his office, and he revealed the depth of cartel-linked financing hidden within the gambling operations. But his most explosive revelation wasn't about the money, it was about the sheriff's system of fabricated legitimacy. Krishna detailed how Lopez used ceremonial badges to grant cartel-connected figures a facade of law enforcement authority. That detail, small on its face, became a cornerstone of the federal case. It proved intent planning and a criminal structure masquerading as public service. From the moment Krishna agreed to cooperate, the trajectory of the investigation shifted. Federal agents no longer saw fragments. They saw the full map. They knew where to strike, who to monitor, which financial channels to freeze, and which deputies could unravel under pressure. And while Krishna talked, Lopez remained confident, unaware that the man he trusted most had already signed the document that would end his career, his network, and his freedom. For years, Sheriff Lopez believed his inner circle was airtight. He handpicked allies, rewarded loyalty, and enforced silence through fear as much as through favor. But the collapse of every criminal empire begins the same way, not with an outsider breaking in, but with an insider breaking ranks. For Lopez, that insider was Krishna Maharaj, the trusted operator who managed money flows, mediated disputes, and served as the sheriff's informal bridge to the gambling underworld. Krishna was more than an associate. He was the architect of many backroom deals, the handler of cash drop-offs, and the keeper of operational secrets, including which rooms paid protection, which owed back taxes, which competitors needed to be handled, and which deputies could be relied upon for selective enforcement. Lopez saw him as indispensable. What he didn't see was the pressure building around him. When federal agents first approached Krishna, they didn't come with threats. They came with evidence bank deposits. He couldn't explain messages he thought were deleted surveillance footage of meetings he believed were invisible. They laid out the structure of the criminal enterprise piece by piece, showing him exactly where he fit inside a conspiracy that now carried federal racketeering weight. For Krishna, the choice became brutally simple: go down with the empire or help dismantle it. He chose survival. Once he flipped, the FBI gained something far more valuable than financial records or wiretaps. They gained the blueprint. Krishna walked investigators through the entire ecosystem: how cash moved, how favoritism worked, which raids were staged to destroy competition, and which badge recipients acted as unofficial enforcers. He confirmed long-standing suspicions about Lopez's manipulation of his office, and he revealed the depth of cartel-linked financing hidden within the gambling operations. At the center of that structure stood Sheriff Marcos Lopez, a man elected on promises of reform, but who, according to federal affidavits, secretly orchestrated a sprawling $20 million criminal enterprise behind the facade of public service. Under his watch, illegal gambling rooms flourished in Central Florida, cash collections multiplied, and cartel-linked intermediaries gained unrestricted access to county operations. Every raid, every arrest, every so-called victory he celebrated now looked suspiciously like the removal of competitors rather than the enforcement of law. But his most explosive revelation wasn't about the money, it was about the sheriff's system of fabricated legitimacy. Krishna detailed how Lopez used ceremonial badges to grant cartel-connected figures a facade of law enforcement authority. That detail, small on its face, became a cornerstone of the federal case. It proved intent planning and a criminal structure masquerading as public service. From the moment Krishna agreed to cooperate, the trajectory of the investigation shifted. Federal agents no longer saw fragments. segments. They saw the full map. They knew where to strike, who to monitor, which financial channels to freeze, and which deputies could unravel under pressure. And while Krishna talked, Lopez remained confident, unaware that the man he trusted most had already signed the document that would end his career, his network, and his freedom. While Florida was erupting under the weight of Lopez's collapsing empire, federal investigators were quietly confronting an even darker reality. The corruption pattern did not stop at the county line. It stretched westward across highways, desert corridors, and into the very gates of America's southwestern border. What began as a localized racketeering probe in Osceola County now appeared to mirror a larger infection spreading through Texas and California, where border agents had begun to blur the line between enforcement and facilitation. The first cracks emerged in Texas. In a case that shook Homeland Security Border Patrol agents uncovered one of their own, an officer who had accepted tens of thousands of dollars to waive migrant-loaded vehicles through inspection points. The scheme was simple, brutal, and effective. Smugglers sent texts with coded emojis. A thumbs up meant the car was approaching, a star meant the agent was on duty, and a dollar sign meant the payoff was confirmed. Cars packed with undocumented migrants rolled through without questions. And when investigators finally confronted the agent, they discovered a ledger of bribes dating back months. But Texas was not the endpoint, only the beginning. In California, the corruption escalated from personnel to entire units. At the San Ysidro and Otay Mesa ports of entry, federal agents uncovered cases where officers allegedly sold access, allowing cartel couriers to slip through inspection lanes undetected. One officer later arrested was found to have earned more than $250,000 in bribes, a staggering figure considering the short duration of the scheme. The pattern was unmistakable. The same cartels feeding Florida's gambling revenue streams were exploiting weaknesses along the border, testing loyalty with cash, and expanding influence by corrupting the very people tasked with stopping them. What tied Florida to the Southwest wasn't geography, it was methodology. The same elements appeared everywhere. Money drops disguised as routine meetups, burner phones used for routing instructions, official channels manipulated for criminal convenience, coordinated silence inside law enforcement circles. In Texas, officers let vehicles pass. In California, they let contraband walk through checkpoints. In Florida, Lopez let an entire shadow economy flourish. Each case was separate on paper, but together they revealed an unmistakable national pattern, a system where cartel reach expanded every time a badge was bought, compromised, or misused. The FBI now understood the scope. Corruption was not an isolated Florida scandal. It was a spreading architecture linking county corruption, border infiltration, and cartel financing into one continuous chain. And the next link in that chain would explode into public view in San Diego. San Diego was supposed to be the firewall, the final barrier, where cartel operations met the full weight of US border security. Instead, it became the place where the illusion shattered. In late-night briefings, federal analysts described the region not as a checkpoint, but as a pressure valve where criminal networks tested the integrity of American institutions, one compromised officer at a time. And in 2024, that valve finally blew open. But Lopez was only the beginning. The FBI's early morning sweep uncovered a network that pulsed far beyond Osceola County, a network connected by burner phones, coded messages, fabricated documents, and cash drops that happened in quiet parking lots long after midnight. Each seized device, each flipped witness, each recorded conversation pointed toward the same chilling conclusion: cartel influence was no longer knocking at America's door. It had already walked inside, sat at the table, and donned a badge. The breaking point came when Homeland Security investigators traced a series of suspicious crossings at the San Ysidro port of entry. Vehicles flagged for anomalies sailed through inspection lanes untouched. Courier foot traffic rose sharply during certain officers' shifts. One pattern kept repeating. The lanes operated by a handful of CBP officers showed a statistically impossible clean rate, as if contraband simply stopped existing whenever they were on duty. Behind the anomaly, agents found the truth cash contacts and collusion. When federal teams executed the arrests, they uncovered a scheme staggering in scope. One officer had accepted more than $250,000 in bribes, granting cartel couriers seamless passage. Another maintained a burner phone communication line with smugglers using a rotating sequence of emojis to signal when inspection booths were safe. A third provided internal schedules alerting traffickers which lanes were staffed by officers who could be compromised. Individually, each case was damning. Together, they formed a blueprint of systemic vulnerability. But the greatest revelation did not come from the bribes, it came from the coordination. Evidence from phones, financial transfers, and travel logs showed connections stretching from San Diego to Texas and from the borderlands back to illegal gambling channels in Florida. Somewhere along the chain cartel, strategists realized they did not need to overpower the system. They only needed to puncture it, one officer here, one sheriff there, one port of entry at a time. San Diego's case files read like a nationwide cross-section of failure. Corrupted officers at ports of entry, smuggling networks exploiting knowledge of federal procedures, financial channels mirroring the laundering structure uncovered in Florida, operational tactics identical to those used in Texas corruption cases. The FBI's conclusion was chilling. The United States was not dealing with random outbreaks of misconduct. It was confronting a national architecture of infiltration, one refined across states and reinforced through repetition. San Diego didn't just reveal a scandal, it revealed a crisis of system-wide integrity and set the stage for the stark conclusion investigators could no longer ignore. By the time federal agents connected the cases in Florida, Texas, and California, one reality had crystallized. These were not isolated scandals, not unfortunate coincidences, not random lapses in judgment. They were iterations of the same design, a repeating pattern proving that cartel infiltration had evolved from opportunistic bribery into a structured strategic attack on American institutions. And the most alarming truth was this: the system wasn't merely being exploited. In key places, it was being repurposed. The fall of Sheriff Lopez revealed what happens when corruption takes root inside a local agency. Texas showed what happens when individual border agents become entry points for criminal expansion. San Diego demonstrated what happens when entire procedural chains inside federal infrastructure can be manipulated. When investigators laid these cases side by side, the similarities were impossible to ignore. Each involved money drops, each involved inside access, each involved official authority being weaponized for cartel benefit, each fit seamlessly into the wider network of undocumented migration, drug trafficking, and financial laundering. What emerged was a national threat not because of the number of corrupt officers, but because of the strategic value each compromised badge provided. One sheriff can alter enforcement priorities across a county. One border agent can open a corridor big enough for smuggling operations to thrive. One port officer can ensure the safe passage of couriers moving millions in narcotics or cash. The pattern didn't just expose corruption, it exposed vulnerabilities embedded inside the architecture of US security itself. Federal analysts began framing the issue differently. This was no longer a law enforcement problem, it was a counterintelligence problem. Cartels were behaving less like street criminal groups and more like foreign operational entities, studying systemic cracks, probing institutional weaknesses, and investing in corruptible personnel as long-term assets. They did not need to infiltrate entire agencies, only the right people at the right pressure points. The Lopez case became the cautionary centerpiece, the demonstration of how easily one official's betrayal could cascade outward, distorting the system far beyond his jurisdiction. His downfall, followed by the Texas bribe scandals and the San Diego port corruption cases, formed a pattern too consistent to dismiss. The morning raids in Florida were merely the opening shot of a broader revelation, one that would expose betrayal's secret deals and a corruption pattern spreading from county offices to border checkpoints and into the national bloodstream. The conclusion was unavoidable and chilling. This is not the exception, it is the model, and unless the model is dismantled, the security of the nation remains compromised from within. By the time the sun rose over central Florida, one truth had become undeniable. Every road in this investigation, every coded message, every cash shipment, every shutdown competitor eventually led back to one man, Sheriff Marcos Lopez. To the public, he presented himself as a reformer, a straight-talking lawman determined to clean up Osceola County. But behind closed doors, federal agents had spent months documenting a parallel identity: Lopez as architect, coordinator, and protector of a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise operating under the cover of his office. His power did not come from charisma or public trust. It came from the badge. That badge allowed him to move silently between worlds, the world of law enforcement and the world of cartel-linked operators who needed political cover, strategic muscle, and a shield from scrutiny. According to federal filings, Lopez delivered all three. He approved the opening of illegal gambling rooms, appointed allies to key supervisory roles, and used sheriff's department resources to target rivals who interfered with his criminal revenue streams. While the public believed he was dismantling dangerous operations, agents now suspect many of those raids were strategic hits designed to eliminate competition. Lopez also mastered the politics of loyalty. Deputies who aligned with him found themselves promoted, protected, or cut into side deals. Those who refused were sidelined or pushed out. The ecosystem he built resembled less a public institution and more a cartel franchise, hierarchical, profitable, and enforced through intimidation, wrapped in professional authority. At its peak, investigators estimate the illegal gambling network under his protection generated over $20 million revenue that funded bribes, operational expenses, and an expanding circle of corruption. But the sheriff's operation did not thrive on intimidation alone. It thrived on access to sensitive information, access to personnel rosters, access to law enforcement channels that could be manipulated, delayed, or weaponized. Cartel intermediaries did not need to sneak into the county. Lopez practically rolled out a red carpet. His willingness to exchange official power for cash transformed Osceola County from a jurisdiction into a marketplace.